Okay, everybody, welcome to our webcast entitled Understanding Asset Leasing in D365 Finance and Supply Chain and ASC 842. Over the course of this webcast, we're going to discuss what the ASC 842 rules are, how they will impact you as a business, and what are different options to become compliant with ASC 842, both utilizing Microsoft Dynamics and options outside of Dynamics. So I will turn it over to our presenters today, Michelle and Felipe.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, I'm Michelle Kiefer, and for the last 4 years, I've been solely focused on helping clients become compliant with the standard of 842 by translating technical accounting requirements into operational and lease accounting requirements and business process design. I've been part of numerous implementations from the analyze, configuration, testing, training phases to the go-live deployment. Felipe, would you like to share your experience?
Yes, thanks, Michelle. So hi, everybody. My name is Felipe Lozano. I'm a senior associate with our D365 Finance and Supply Chain practice. I have experience with implementing D365 across various industries with a focus on the finance area. And I've also been involved with providing services to multiple asset leasing projects that are either implemented prior to a go live or post go live.
As far as the agenda, let's go over the agenda and the topics that we're going to talk about. The overview of the RSM practices, we're going to share with you the multidisciplinary team that we have dedicated to helping clients comply with the new leasing standard. We'll give you an overview of the new standard and, why did FASB revise the standard and what's changed. We'll share with you a successful RSM process. It's a 842 implementation methodology and approach. We'll walk through an indicative timeline and paths to compliance. Felipe is going to share with you the D65 overview of the asset leasing module. He's going to talk about the features, determining whether the finance and supply chain asset leasing module is right for your company. We're going to share with you a client example and lessons learned. Throughout the course, please feel free to use the button, the Q&A, and at the end, we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. So let's share with you our RSM D365 and lease accounting practices. Felipe and I are part of a broader team. This is not only a technology implementation, but a new accounting standard implementation. It's actually an international multidisciplinary team. And what I mean by that, we have technical accountants, we have our technology consultants, we have project managers, abstractors that can take the particular details of a lease and put them into whatever technology you require from not only an English perspective, but multiple language. And not said but least is sort of our tax advisors, an element that is sometimes overlooked during the compliance aspect. As you can tell, we've been a Microsoft partner for over 30 years, have 300 plus clients, and from a lease administration and accounting implementation, we've done over 300 plus implementations, both public, private companies. Lease portfolios have actually varied from a few less than 10 to upwards of over 100,000 leases. The other aspect to draw your attention to is that we're finding a migration of companies not wanting to take on the ongoing sort of what we would call the day two compliance, the journal entries, the abstraction, and have outsourced their leasing services. And under our umbrella, we currently manage over 62,000 leases in-house. So what has caused all these problems and why did FASB do it? Let's go to the new accounting standard. So the new accounting lease accounting standard is viewed by many as one of the most significant changes in accounting to come about recently. Effectively, ASC 842 strives to fundamentally record all leases on the balance sheet. These changes to lease accounting will impact all companies that operate as lessees or lessors or both across all industries. So no one is without having to comply. Why did FASB revise the lease standard? They issued the new standard to increase transparency and comparability among entities by recognizing leases on balance sheet and providing more information about leasing arrangements so that user of the financial statements can assess the amount, timing, and uncertainty of cash flows from leases. So what really changed with the new lease accounting standard? The new standard will require that all assets identified in agreements as leases with terms of a year or longer will be on the company's balance sheet, capitalized as a right of use or a right of use asset with the lease offset as a liability. So we get asked many questions about the dates, and as we go through this discussion, the FASB actually delayed this several times, and as you can see, it was due to the complexity of the standard and COVID, and really the preparedness of private companies to take on the implementation. Right now, there are no more delays. Effectively, any companies with a calendar year end in 2022 need to be compliant by 1/1/2022. We're going to walk through our process, and the next slide is going to show you sort of how we approach an implementation. Before I get into details, just high level, as I said, this is a complex standard. And what I mean by that is that you're going to have to assess your current state processes. How do you handle leases today? You're going to have to look to the future and say, how am I going to handle them once I do implement the standard? And how is that going to impact the technology and my internal controls? You're going to have to also get a lot of different stakeholders involved. So just think about your leasing process and who's involved, who negotiates. It could be procurement, it could be different business units. Where are the lease documentation stored? How does accounting get aware of it? And how's that information captured? So when we look at it, it's not only accounting complexities, but it's also about knowing where all your leases are. And that's been a huge issue for a lot of our clients. We like to say all of our clients have all their lease documentation in a nice centralized repository in a SharePoint site. Many of them don't. So one thing out of this you can get if you start getting your lease documentation in one central area. The other reason why I'd say this is complex, before we get into some of the work streams below, is that you need to retouch the lease and take out information and put it into a solution so that you can ensure you can get the appropriate journal entries. And it requires someone who understands accounting and how to interpret some of those things. So I said, hey, you need to implement this, from a technology and a compliance, and you're going to have to revisit not only your processes, your internal controls, and sort of the capabilities to handle lease accounting going forward. So when we look at our approach below, we sort of put it into three different buckets, sort of the assessment and strategy, the implementation, and optimization. Let me go into a little bit greater detail on some of the things that I think would be helpful for you as you go through this process. Let's start with the project initiation and planning. I touched on a few minutes ago is really confirming who are the stakeholders in the lease process, getting informing them of the new standard, that things are going to change, and understanding their commitment to helping you be successful from an accounting perspective. Those people are going to be key for the next part of the assessment and strategy is the business requirements and contract analysis. The key stakeholders and you will need to understand sort of what are the business processes that you currently have. What is your current lease portfolio? Is it merely real estate? Is it real estate and equipment? Even if it's equipment, are there MSAs? Are there unique characteristics within that portfolio that you would need to know right now that would be helpful? I'll give you some examples. Does your portfolio have CPI? Does it have percent rent? And different things of that nature is very important. The other thing is understanding your current technology. I know you all have D365, but are there any other solutions that you are currently using in the leasing process that you would want to know what information's in there and how it will fit eventually into this product? Then we move on to defining the 842 impact. Many of you are probably aware of that, because of this new standard, the FASB had to issue practical expedients. These are options that you can elect that will make compliance easier. During the 842 process, identifying potential embedded leases. This really speaks to your accuracy and completeness of your lease portfolio. Embedded leases are technically a lease agreement that is in a contract. And in this contract, it conveys the right of control of an identified assets. So it's typically service level agreements where you're paying for, a monthly fee, and in it, you may potentially get an asset for free. Well, in this perspective, that is an embedded lease. While you're in this defined 842 impact, communicating with your external auditors is imperative. Telling them this is what we're going to elect, here's sort of the materiality we're going to employ, and the such. The next piece is a technology selection, and Felipe is going to speak to the product, and really this is a point where you all need to figure out what solution works, and this solution potentially could work for you. Once you do select the solution, we sort of move into the implementation phase. From you all's perspective, you say, hey, it's only technology. It's actually a lot of different elements, not only accounting, but also technology. The business process and system design, it's really establish a lease abstraction plan and validation plan. The lease abstraction is terminology you'll become quite familiar with throughout this process. Lease abstraction is really reading a lease, taking data fields and putting it into a solution for you to get the journal entries and disclosures that you require. During this process of business process and system design, you want to really look at your future accounting policies. What aspects do I need to determine now, and how I'm going to treat things going forward? Next, you'll work to, once you design and understand all the configuration that is required, you'll next move into the configuration stage where someone will configure it. During the stage, it says this is a point where the system's up and ready. You would abstract the information into a template or directly into the user interface. After you do all that, you'll need to dedicate some time to testing the system. Not only does the information coming appropriately keyed in, and does it make sense, but also does it agree to sort of different pieces of information that you currently have. such as your future minimum lease payments that you did last year. Does it agree to what it is now from a lease completeness perspective? How well do the expense numbers tie into your AP? And you also want at this point to validate the calculations of the journal entries as well as disclosures. This is helpful because sometimes when you put information into a system, you may want to interpret it a little bit differently based on the outcomes of what you expected. Once testing is signed off, you go into deployment and you're ready to go off and do it regularly. On the optimized phase, this is really about, we've had a lot of clients, as I said earlier, where they don't really want to take this on a go-forward basis. So this is where they've contemplated having someone take over the abstraction of new and modified leases, accounting for key events, monthly journal entries, reporting packages, helping with year-end support of disclosure footnotes, reports, disclosure, reconciliation, backup, and audit support. So a couple big takeaways from this is that the standard requires more judgment and estimation, evaluation and documentation from not only lease documentation, but your decisions is critical to support this additional audit complexity. So throughout the course of this implementation, you should be documenting all your decisions in what we call an implementation memo. So your auditors can feel comfortable that you took the time and care to become compliant. So if I were in your shoes, start gathering your data, implementing solutions, picking a solution and getting started. So at this point, I'd like to ask everyone if they could tell us how many leases do you have in your portfolio? If you want to put that in the chat, that would be great. And the reason why I'm doing is Felipe is showing an indicative timeline, and I would like to just get a flavor of how many leases everyone has.
You should be able to put in the Q&A section, just a private kind of question that we have that you have there.
Okay, so looking at this indicative timeline, so this timeline represents what we have experienced from a client that has roughly 100 leases. From start of the assessment phase to deployment, we're looking at a 6-month time frame, and you're saying, whoa, why does it take so long? Part of items that we have run across as sort of impediments to doing this more quickly is people have issues with getting their finding all their lease documents, making decisions timely, and then we come across month-end close, audits, blackout periods, vacation, and holidays. So when you look at this, some of the items can be done in parallel. While the embedded leases can start while you're doing the design, and during that process after the system's configured and you're looking at your embedded leases, lease abstraction can go forward. So just wanted to give you all sort of a flavor of sort of the timeline and the main elements that we're looking for full implementation. Next, we want to share with you sort of our paths to compliance. RSM has defined 3 paths to compliance, and we've done this to meet our clients' needs, culture, and resource availability. Depending on the current state and future circumstances surrounding your company and your lease portfolio, the path may differ. Big picture, all these paths are applicable for the Dynamics 365 lease asset leasing module. Some of the factors that need to be considered of what path is appropriate is the number of leases in your portfolio, as well as the dynamic nature and complexity of your leases. What's the economic value and overall materiality of your leases? So some of them, if they're not material, you may not want to include them in a solution because of the ongoing maintenance. Sort of level of involvement from your company is the existing level of technical accounting experience and knowledge of the lease accounting standard. We have several clients that just had other things going on, whether it was an acquisition or staff turnover, just didn't feel that they could take this on. And really the capacity to take this implementation on initial adoption and ongoing lease accounting. So when we look at the three different paths, we have basic, full, and lease accounting services. The basic would be for a small portfolio, not very complex, where you all could be self-service and be able to implement it. The full implementation is for a higher volume of leases, more complex. You all need a little bit more tailoring and help with the implementation, and so that is available. What I will say is that some clients, they said, well, I can take this on, can you help us with that? And of course, we're able to do that from an advisory perspective. The lease accounting service is really the outsourced support for your technical lease accounting. And just given the challenge of internal prioritization of internal resources, a lot of companies are leveraging our services. This is sort of that you have a reduced internal resource for the day two accounting. We have 842 specialists. We have 842 specialists that are in different languages. So one of the barriers to some of the companies is they can't abstract the information into the system because they cannot read it. This also from a lease accounting services, you'll have a more accelerated implementation process and followed by ongoing support. And we can also help with the quarterly and annual reporting requirements. Felipe, you're next.
Thanks, Michelle. So in the next couple slides, we're going to go through an overview of Dynamics 365 and what the asset leasing module can provide for us. Along with that, we'll go through some of the neat features that it provides. We're going to be talking about whether or not asset leasing is going to be a fit for the company, an example, and also some lessons learned before we get into the wrap up. Jumping here into the next slide, going into the overview, right? The goal of the module overall isn't only to be in compliance, but it's also to reduce any sort of risk moving forward, right? What we want to look into is also automating and or modernizing your financial operations in regards to leases. That's the overall goal. What we've seen in the past is a lot of the time when we go through an implementation of the asset leasing module, we see an increase in confidence of the end user as they have to be in compliance with this new norm, right? This new standard that has been set. Another thing to note is this module's inside of the system, just like accounts payable, accounts receivable, general ledger. So with this module being within the system, there is a higher value in having all of your leases in one centralized location and thus at a lower cost considering that it is already encompassed within the D365 licensing that most of you have or will be having right in the future in case you are in an implementation currently. When the module is implemented correctly and everything is done with all the steps that Michelle is mentioning, right, all the implementation processes that we go through, we see that there's an increase in productivity, right? A lot more of a seamless month-end process when it comes to leases. And just to echo again, going through this new compliance can be difficult for a lot of clients, and having a system guide you through it and making sure we have an audit trail, right, of transaction, adjustment to leases, decisions made on these leases can only provide additional visibility and strategic decision-making abilities. Along with that, if we look at the bottom right here, we can see that Microsoft provides integration into accounts payable, so we'll directly be paying our vendors. It also is integrated into fixed assets in case this lease ends up becoming a building or a vehicle that we own, right? Next up, I have the features that are available within the asset leasing module. A couple things we want to call out here is how user-friendly the module can be. There's an adjustment wizard within the module that was developed by Microsoft after it actually released the module. Reason being is they noticed that adjusting a lease manually and making sure that the lease term is taken into consideration and everything else can actually be quite cumbersome. So they created an adjustment wizard that allows it to be a pretty dynamic adjustment to the lease, whether we're increasing or decreasing the incremental borrowing rate or eliminating some of the months from the lease term. Along with that, we have the famous workspaces that are available within all the other modules in D365. There's a lease management workspace, which is a one-stop shop for all the lease transactions and reporting. Along with that, there is functionality available to make terminations very easily. So I guess a good example would be during COVID, if we had to terminate a couple of leases, right? We're not going through and making sure our entries are correct. The system through the lease posting profile will dictate what the terminations postings are going to be. Alongside that, what the asset balance is, liability balance, etc. The module itself also allows for a lot of automation. So what we see in the system, and this is it's almost like a pattern within various modules, is it allows you to create batch entries. So I can create batch entries for all of my interest calculations for all of my leases all at once, right? You can set it up to be reoccurring at once a month. And this is where we talked about in the previous slide about making a more of a seamless month-end process for leases and building confidence within that. Within the module, we also have the lease approval workflows. Workflows are a common theme across various modules in D365. And if we need a lease approval workflow within the system, the module can accommodate that. In regards to data management, Microsoft provides you with a lease import framework. It's not like the data management workspace that's available out of the box for those who are familiar with it. It is actually a specific framework that's only available for asset leasing, where we can create, update lease information, or adjust leases through one import. This becomes extremely handy when we're updating various leases, right? And I think Michelle mentioned this, when there are more than 25 or more leases, right? It makes it a lot easier. Like other modules, there's Excel add-in functionality and pretty extensive reporting available. So is the asset leasing module right for me, right, for my company? What we see here is a lot of the time it depends on the size of your lease portfolio and your company's goals, right? Are we going to continue to grow? Do we need scalability in this sense, right? Am I currently not in compliance? Do we want one centralized location for all of our leases alongside all of our financial processes? And am I tracking any of my leases manually? So that's when it would be a fit. A lot of the time it's when we're constantly adding leases year over year and we see our lease portfolio just growing, right? Where it would not be a fit would be if we have less than 25 leases. Reason being, and I think Michelle mentioned this, is there may be other software providers out there that can actually integrate into D365, where we're managing those limited amount of leases separately. However, it still integrates transactional data into D365, right? If we're currently already using a lease software that is compatible, sometimes it's not worth jumping into the asset leasing module. Reason being because we can just integrate into Dynamics. Another reason why it would not be a fit is if we are the lessor and we are leasing buildings out, D365 asset leasing does not provide functionality for that. In our case, it's only if you are the lessee. Along with that, if your company has any qualitative clauses to keep in compliance or a need for mass document upload, that is not something that D365 out of the box can do. So the next slide, we have an implementation, and I want to kind of mirror and talk about how Michelle mentioned a lot of our processes. So during discovery, we have an industrial manufacturing client that maintains around 65 leases and is increasing 3 to 5 leases per year, right? And this is going back to the last slide, right? Where it would be a fit is where we see an increase of leases per year. Along with that, we already have a large lease portfolio. Going back to the original slide, an overview, right? If we have an outdated lease management system where we're either leveraging Excel or leveraging some sort of software that does not integrate into D365, and we are currently running our processes in D365, finance and supply chain, we see that it could be a functionality to jump into D365 and leverage asset leasing, right? In order to modernize our financial operations. In this case, we have all leasing accounting and no lessor. As mentioned before, that's not functionality available out of the box, right? And then in this case, we would do what Michelle mentioned as assessment and strategy, right? Where we go through, we see based on the stakeholders, you know, what route do we want to take, right? Are we going to go through with D365 asset leasing? Is it more appropriate to actually go with another lease software, for example, like LeaseQuery, and integrate into D365? What are our options here? If we decide to go through with D365, we start to gather requirements, right? Go through a design phase, as we like to call it, and actually see, in this case, right, where we need historical entries from all existing leases. We need suitable workflows to allow approvals from management in order to go through and create a lease within the system. If there are any requirements for additional reporting, right? Let's say, for example, some of the reporting available out of the box for D365 is not suitable for what we need, whether it's for month-end reconciliation or reporting externally, right? These are requirements we need to gather during a design phase. And also distribution of lease expenses to different operating units. So this is a pretty common requirement across clients, where, for example, if we have a large production facility that we actually rent the building out, the production facility may be split out across various operating units or departments, right? Half of it's going to be, we'll consider the warehousing department, half of it may be actually for the accounting department, right? Receiving, and depending on how we separate those operating units, what we'll see is a lot of the time clients need to have some sort of enhancement done to the module in order to account for these splits between the departments within one building, in a sense. Next slide, let's go over some risks and lessons learned. What we've noticed is during implementation and go live, a lot of the time we see insufficient staffing from the client side led to inaccuracies, right? In a sense, we are underestimating the lift here, right? The lift that it takes to go live with the module, and also at the same time, right, in tandem, complying to the new standards, right? It's almost like drinking water from a fire hose, right? So we need to make sure we have enough staffing on the client side that is dedicated to this process, right? To this process change. It kind of hits the second bullet point there, where dedication from leadership and users, right? Commitment that we are going to go through with this. And in the end, right, it'll lead to that productivity that we're looking for, that seamless month end instead of going through Excel sheets, for example, or other processes that we go through in order to get our lease transactions into our current system. So some suggestions here is ensuring that we always have sufficient staffing on both sides, whether it's the implementation team side and also the client side, in order to ensure that testing, training, everything goes as planned and everybody knows what role they're playing moving forward. Along with that is we want to make sure we take the correct approach, right? Asset leasing is a phenomenal module where Microsoft continues to invest and improve on this module. The example being the adjustment wizard, right? Which would go from the manual adjustment all the way into the automated adjustment through the wizard, right? What we want to make sure though is that we're going with the correct approach, whether that's asset leasing or whether that's another leasing software that integrates into D365. We want to be sure that we are not taking additional risks by just going through and implementing the module just because we think it's a fit or if we have D365, right? It's determining whether or not it's appropriate for us to take this on. Some closing comments and an overall wrap up. Go through some key considerations is this is an opportunity with new standards. Does not only come new challenges, but also opportunity, right? Where we can have automation, organization, and transparency for our lease accounting processes. I think one thing that Michelle mentioned was visibility, right? Being able to see what our actual transactions are throughout the system, having an audit trail, right? This is an opportunity for your organization to take that next step for your financial operations. We want to make sure we're planning for success by considering these updated compliances, the software available to us, and also planning for that collaboration across different teams between an implementation team and the client team. Along with that, a lot of the time, clients and the implementation team will underestimate the lift here. It is extremely complex. I think Michelle mentioned it a lot of the times, right, where there is going to have to be some sort of time for adoption here. And not only just up and running, but up and running correctly. Along with this, right, when it comes to any sort of decisions that we're making for this, companies with 10 or more leases should be looking into implementing a new lease accounting software. Reason being that you want to be able to improve and automate your processes moving forward. Along with that, lack of centralized lease contract databases usually increase the level of effort and timeline for adoption in any sort of implementation. So what we want to take away from here, from this presentation, is there's a lot of opportunity in this area. Whether you're currently implementing D365 with one of RSM's implementation teams, or whether you're already live on D365. And then considering whether or not you are in compliance with the new lease accounting requirements, right? There's a lot of opportunity for us to take. On the bottom here, we can see some of the resources we can reach out to. You should definitely reach out to your RSM D365 contacts if you are interested. We also have a 1-hour assessment available via our Microsoft App Source. We included a link for asset leasing getting started, the Microsoft docs that are available. And also feel free to reach out to our D365 industrials team for any next steps on RSM's lease accounting services. So at this time, we'll take any questions from the audience.
You can just type those in the Q&A and we will answer them live when applicable.
In the meantime, can we share with the attendees the links that were embedded in the PowerPoint for them to reach out and get the additional collateral?
Yep. Yep, I will be putting those links out there right now.
So we just got a question. So currently, someone is implementing D365 from AX 2012. They purchased another software and are trying to decide if we want to move our lease accounting over to D365 or keep that software. And it's roughly around 100 to 150 leases that are in the other software. How long would it take to decide if we decide to implement D365? So it looks like we'd have to get the information out of the third-party software for a data conversion. Team, what are your thoughts about data conversion and migrating that over to this solution? How long do you think that could potentially work? Or how long do you think that would potentially be? Would it stick to sort of a 6-month time frame of implementation that we shared before?
I don't think, Julia Sharapa from RSM. I don't think it would take much additional time. I think it would just take more of an effort around go live, getting all the leases implemented. But I think, especially unless we're dealing with multiple frameworks, I don't think anything that when Michelle went over the timeline, I don't think anything would change from that. So that's my personal opinion, and from my previous experience, that's I think that'd be how that would go.
One thing that just to share with the person that asked that question, one thing is the migration is really a walk from your third-party system over to D365 and mapping the fields and how you're going to treat that. The other thing is if you've already implemented and are already under 842, is really when you want that cutoff to begin to come over to the new system. So I think, as Julia said, if you already made some of your accounting decisions and you've got the data, and it can be an easy mapping situation and testing, it could limit that 6 months down to further than that in a shorter time frame. Hopefully that helps. Any other questions?
Oh, there's a question around cost associated with the implementation. And I think that would probably vary.
Yep.
When you're signing the statement of work. I don't know if there'd be anything consistent across the board.
It would depend on your path to compliance, number of leases, and whether you all would need sort of a technical accounting support, and whether you would want us to abstract the leases. When we do a statement of work, it's usually a la carte and says, here are all the services we can provide. And some clients will say, we got that, we'll take it on. And it might be, some people say, I'll take on the abstraction, I'll enter the information. Others like, no, like get it in there. So, so it really depends on the path of compliance. Nick, were you going to say something? I'm sorry if I cut you off.
Nope, you said the exact same thing I was going to say. If there are no more questions right now, we will go ahead and end the team live event. Within the Q&A section, there is the links that we talked about and an email address to reach out if you do have more questions. So please feel free to reach out if you want to have a deeper conversation on your requirement, or if you have individual questions on either the D365 asset leasing module or just ASC 842 in general, and how to on what your path to compliance would look like.